At the climax of the Iranian embassy siege in 1980, the SAS burst onto the world's television screens and became an instant legend. The regiment had been training for this day for 10 years, and it would define them in the popular imagination. Dark and brutal, but undeniably glamorous. At the time, the heroics of the embassy siege and the killing of the terrorists there were seen as morally uncomplicated. But using special forces to sort out civil problems in the UK was to become far more controversial when they were sent in to counter homegrown terrorism in Northern Ireland.
When you're actually involved in the operation itself, you don't think of the danger, you just think that this is our job, we're unstoppable, let's do it. And if you have to kill somebody who is armed, you've got to pull the trigger, because, you know, these guys don't mess around. You know, it's kill or be killed, I'm afraid.
The letters SAS are most likely to conjure an image of black-clad supermen.
That's my balaclava, that.
Invincible, ruthless killers.
Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
In fact, the role of counter-terrorist urban warrior was a new and hastily acquired one for a regiment more used to fighting secret but orthodox wars in the far-flung deserts and jungles of the world. But in the 1960s, a new threat faced the world: international terrorism. Extremists learned that they could blackmail governments and win publicity by hijacking aircraft or taking hostages. When terrorists kidnapped Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics in 1972, German police made a disastrous rescue attempt which ended in a bloodbath. This prompted the British government to instruct the SAS to set up a counter-revolutionary warfare wing. By the time of the Iranian embassy siege, years of training had prepared the SAS for exactly such a crisis. What the TV cameras didn't see followed a well-rehearsed but hitherto untested set of moves here recreated. How to storm a room, kill the gunman, but leave the hostages unscathed. The tactics had been perfected in a special area at their headquarters known as the Killing House.
The Killing House is a multi-purpose range consisting of several rooms, a large combat room, smaller combat rooms and individual combat rooms. They're all fully kitted out for 360-degree arcs of fire, so you can literally open fire anywhere in the room apart from through the door which you just entered the range by.
Sometimes you may rush in, so you're making noise. Other times you go sneaky beaky, you know. It could be daytime, it could be nighttime.
The SAS developed techniques which would one day be copied around the world.
We had to train to go onto aircraft, we had to train to go on trains, we had to train to go on ships. Anything that, where there were crowds of people, where people are likely to become hostages. You know, we had to train to, you know, to be able to get them out.
The basic room combat was all learnt inside the Killing House, and these skills were honed and improved literally on a daily basis, because the SAS anti-terrorist team does train on a daily basis.
Only live ammunition is used in the Killing House, many thousands of rounds of it every year, compared to the handful allowed the regular army. SAS soldiers themselves often play the role of hostage, surrounded by targets representing the terrorists and trusting their lives to the skill of their colleagues.
I used to stand there against the wall. Either I'd do it or my mate would do it, we'd swap about. And I'd stand against the wall, and we used to have these targets. We used to call them Hun's head, basically plywood head. And there'd be one there and one there. And I'd stand against the wall, and all I had on was a pair of goggles, because you get the old crap coming at the end of the gun. And my mate would come in, blah, 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 bang, 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 bang. you know. And he put 2 rounds in his head and 2 rounds in the other. I just stood there, you know. But he didn't bat an eyelid, you know, because I trust him. And he's trusted me when it was my turn to do it, you know.
On the 30th of April 1980, Snapper, Mac and their fellow team members were actually in the killing house when they heard that the Iranian embassy in London had been taken over by a gang of armed gunmen. For the first time, they would face not dummies or their mates, but real terrorists. Inside the embassy, 26 hostages were being held captive by 6 Arab terrorists protesting against Ayatollah Khomeini's persecution of their people in South Iran. Within 24 hours, the SAS team had travelled to London and begun to plan a meticulous, coordinated assault using intelligence gathered from secret cameras and listening devices. They even built a model of the building.
Gradually, we just built up a good picture what the building was like. We'd actually had ground floors drawn out in the gym, the place we were staying, so we could sort of walk through it without the walls, try and get it in your mind's eye. I mean, the idea was, so we could, if we did go in there, we could actually go in there without thinking. You know, do we turn left, do we turn right? We'd actually know it, you know, without thinking.
On day 6 of the siege, after countless deadlines had passed with no concessions granted, the terrorist leader finally snapped and murdered a hostage. His body was pushed out of the front door at 6:20 p.m. At 7:07 p.m, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher gave permission for the SAS to take control of the crisis. 19 minutes later, this is what the world saw. The man holding the wooden frame is Mac, who's an explosives expert. He's about to blast through the embassy's armoured glass windows.
My job was put the explosive charge on the window, placed the frame charge, moved back to the safety of the balcony, blew the window, and then made their way through that window into the embassy.
The name of the game is maximum entry points. You've got to try and get people in on every floor.
I mean, there's like blokes going in the back,
Had people abseiling down,
guys going on the roof.
people going in through the skylight. All in all, possibly around 50 assaulters. As Lord Nelson said, it takes numbers to annihilate.
It was a baptism of fire, but so far it was working. In 2- and 4-man teams moving fast, the SAS began hunting through the building, using CS gas and disorienting explosive devices they developed in the killing house.
It's multi-room combat, basically, rolling down the corridor, clearing each room systematically. You've got to get in there fast, you've got to be aggressive, and you've got to surprise them. Luckily, we've got the stun grenades, which they do create a big surprise.
The idea is to disorientate them with the flashes and the bangs and the smoke, etc., enabling you to get in there very quickly and swiftly clear in the room.
Then that goes in and you're right behind it. If it gives you that couple of seconds distraction, you have got the upper hand.
Because we've done it so often, you don't really notice it. You just carry on charging in and doing your job, and the things are flashing around, you know, banging and flashing around you, and you don't notice it.
Once inside, Mac's group came across one of the hostages, Police Constable Locke, who was struggling with the terrorist leader known as Salim. Locke had managed to conceal a pistol throughout the siege, but all his training as a policeman made him reluctant to use it. The SAS had no such compunction.
We dominated the room, then our other 2 members of the team, they came in, they moved through us, and then they moved on to the next room. This is where Salim and PC Locke were sort of scrabbling about, and they went in and dealt with Salim.
When you get in a building like that, there's gas swirling around, there's smoke, there's confusion, there's panic in people, and you have got to be sufficiently trained to be able to sort out who is the terrorist and who is the hostage.
Mac and his partner moved on and were confronted by another of the terrorists who had fired at the SAS men as they entered. They returned fire and he staggered into a back room. The lessons of the killing house are followed with a practiced ruthlessness that belies the glamorous image of the Black Knights.
When we came into the room, once we could actually see the terrorists, the guy was armed, so you've got no option, you've got to shoot. You can't just stop and say, oh, excuse me, would you like to surrender? You know, I mean, the guy's already fired shots because he'd fired at us anyway, so you know his intentions. He's still got a weapon in his hand, so you've got no option. You've got to shoot.
Such life and death decisions have effectively been taken in advance during killing house training.
Through training, you don't even have to aim the weapon using the eye. You use what's called instinctive shooting. Instead of aiming the weapon up here, you actually just point it, and again you've got an added aid with the torch. Where the torch beam hits, that's where the rounds will hit. First round might hit, say, an enemy in the stomach. The next one, you just tilt back a little bit, the next one hit him in the chest. And it takes, what, a fraction of a second. It's just pure practice.
Once a situation has deteriorated to the point at which the SAS is sent in, terrorists are more likely to be killed than arrested. And for most SAS soldiers, the end justifies the means.
You're not a kill machine, but you're a rescue machine. You may kill in the process of rescue, but you're not just going in there just to kill baddies. You know, it's rescue, that's the main thing.
The remaining gunmen who were guarding the hostages were in the telex room on the second floor. When the SAS stormed the building, the gunmen panicked. Two started firing on their captives, killing one and wounding two others. Then they threw their guns out of the window and tried to surrender. Surviving hostages, however, have said that when the SAS burst into the room, they executed the terrorists in cold blood. At the subsequent inquest, a verdict of justifiable homicide was reached, though some commentators thought that excessive force had been used. But for the SAS, there was no time for hesitation. By now, Snapper's group had reached the ground floor, where the hostages were being manhandled down the staircase. Suddenly, a man amongst them was identified as a terrorist.
Saw this figure coming down the stairs. As he came level with me, luckily I could just see his clenched fist, and I just caught a fleeting glimpse of the Russian grenade, because the primer of a Russian grenade sticks out about 1.5 inches. I whacked him on the back of the head, and he then rolled down the remaining 2 or 3 steps into the reception area.
Regardless of whether he posed a genuine threat, once he had been identified as a terrorist, he was as good as dead.
When you get into a situation like that, you can't afford to hesitate. That's why some of the terrorists got so many bullet holes in them, because the tactic is everybody opens fire, so that you're not looking at each other and going, who's going to pull the trigger first? Because in that split second, the pin's out of the grenade and it's rolling along the floor. You just can't afford to hesitate with these people.
The siege was over. 5 of the terrorists had been killed. The remaining one was captured and is still in prison in the UK. Of 26 hostages originally taken, 5 were released during the siege. 2 were killed by the terrorists and 19 were rescued.
After the siege, I actually felt a sense of victory. There was this overall feeling of a job well done.
But would the SAS be answerable for the use of excessive force? One person was uniquely thrilled by the testosterone-charged rescue of 19 innocent lives. She wanted to congratulate the SAS personally.
The doors at the end of the conference room suddenly burst open, and there's Maggie Thatcher. She stormed in like a Caesar returned to the Senate. Gentlemen, there is nothing sweeter than success, and you boys have got it. And we all cheered, and in she swept. Quite a lady, really.
From then on, the SAS became her boys, and the niceties of whether the SAS had gone too far were quickly swept aside. This photograph reveals an intimacy the public was never meant to see. The negative was supposed to have been destroyed.
Margaret Thatcher, in Margaret Thatcher's eyes, we could do no wrong. I think it proved to the politicians that there was a tool they could use in an emergency when there was a situation outside of their control.
Margaret Thatcher did indeed start to use her newfound strong arm force in some unlikely places and in conditions of great secrecy. In 1987 there was a riot in one of Scotland's toughest prisons. Mrs. Thatcher knew exactly who she wanted to sort it out. Hard by the sea on the northeast coast of Scotland, some 30 miles north of Aberdeen, stands one of the country's most forbidding prisons. Peterhead is home to Scotland's hardest criminals. It has a history of disturbances and violence.
Peterhead prison was different because any prisoner that caused trouble in other jails was sent to Peterhead. And as you know, if you put a bad apple in a barrel of apples, it goes bad. So if you put all the bad apples in one place, it's going to get worse.
Jackie Stewart was on duty on September the 28th, 1987, when 50 of Scotland's most dangerous prisoners rioted and took control of D Wing. He was 56, close to retirement, and not in the best of health, having only one kidney. The prisoners took him hostage.
He was taken into the cell, quite a few prisoners in the cell, then other 4 came in with hoods on and told us to put our head under the bed. And they started laying into us with table legs. I didn't feel anything because I was shouting, screaming, and I never felt any pain. But then eventually some prisoners shouted, "That's enough." And by this time they were trying to break into the attic.
Most of the prisoners gave themselves up after a few hours, but 4 hardliners held out. 2 were murderers, 1 an armed robber. With Jackie as hostage, they holed up in the eaves and then smashed through the tiles onto the roof itself.
The officer being held hostage has been brought out onto the roof by the prisoners who are holding him.
Meanwhile, senior officers at SAS headquarters were taking an unusual interest in what would normally have remained a matter for the prison service and the police. Sergeant Peter Ratcliffe speaks for the first time about the regiment's role in the events that followed.
I wasn't aware of anything about Peterhead really until the phone rang and it was a squadron commander. And he said, "I'm going north." And I was completely flummoxed by, and he said, "Put the TV on." So I put the television onto CFAX. So you do then take an active interest.
Prison staff are continuing a dialogue with the prisoners in an effort to secure the release of the officer.
After 5 days, negotiations with the prisoners were getting nowhere. Graphic television pictures showed how Jackie was being threatened and abused.
It was terrible watching. I've told people before, it was the strangest thing. We never sat at the TV. We all stood. Couldn't sit.
Given the danger that Jackie Stewart was in, the governor judged that it would be too risky to send in prison officers to try and overpower the hostage takers.
I remember the chief constable saying to me, "Are you going to storm the place?" I said, "Not in 100 years. If we get through and Jackie's 30 or 40 yards away with this guy with a knife at his throat, what's his chances going to be?" And my job was to try and keep him alive, not take chances on his life. So there's no way. I told the chief constable, "No, I'm not going to storm the place." So that's perhaps when it moved on to different areas.
Such a blatant breakdown in law and order was particularly embarrassing for the Conservative government. Their annual party conference was due to begin the very next week. Mrs. Thatcher wanted the riot ended. Despite objections from the Director of Special Forces and the Home Secretary, she had no qualms about breaking the taboo against using military force to solve civilian problems.
It could actually set a precedence of sending in other SAS troops.
On the 5th day of the siege, the SAS flew to Scotland in the strictest secrecy. Had the press got hold of the story, it would have been dynamite.
We arrived at the prison early hours of Saturday morning, and we were taken in the back way because the press, etc., were on the main entrance to the prison trying to get coverage. So, as far as the public were aware, it was a police operation.
Even the prison officers didn't know who the sinister new arrivals were.
Middle of one night, the prison bus appeared on the yard through the back gate, and all these strangers disembarked, wearing all manner of clothing and carrying large rucksacks.
They had no masks on, but balaclavas. And they all looked exactly the same.
Nothing was said. No faces was seen. It was just men in black.
If you asked their name, they were called John. Everyone was called John.
They disappeared into the gymnasium and closed the doors.
Once inside the gym, the commanding officer outlined the plan of action. Since the prisoners were unarmed, the SAS were to make a so-called hard arrest, subduing the prisoners without lethal force and using batons if necessary, not guns.
The plan was for 3 groups to do an explosive entry on the 3 floors of D Wing, and about 6 guys to walk along the parapet and go in through the roof. If we had been compromised, then actually they could have actually murdered him, because they're in there for murder anyway. They were the scum of the earth. So really they had nothing to lose.
I sat in a darkened room watching them go along this roof, and I'm praying that no hostage taker would stick his head out of the hole in the roof. Now suppose they had spotted these guys when they were 60 or 70 yards or feet or whatever away from where they were. They've got Jackie, they've got a knife at his throat. Would Jackie have lived? It's a major gamble, and I don't know how justified.
As the SAS crept along the roof, they were spotted by inmates of B Wing opposite, who immediately started shouting and banging the bars of their cells in an attempt to warn their fellow prisoners. The SAS had to abandon their softly approach and get in fast if they were going to save Jackie Stewart.
We had to go in immediately. So the squadron commander over the radio gave stand by, go, and immediately everything went into action.
They ran along the narrow, wet roof edge 80 feet up, and then threw stun grenades down into the attic through the hole in the roof, which the prisoners had made.
Every light window lit up in order, seemed to go around in a circle.
A cloud of dust appeared from the end of the D-hole, and a lot of shouting and banging.
The smoke and gas, even where we were, you were feeling the effects of it.
It was quite frightening.
A black figure came down from the top of the roof there and disappeared inside the window. Never saw him again.
Within moments, the SAS had overpowered the 4 prisoners in the attic.
I'm sure some of the guys must have given 1 or 2 of them a bit of a clout, but nothing to write home about. The guys were walking and not actually being stretchered away.
There was flash, bang, and just chaos like. Well, I didn't know who they were. A guy took a hold of me, and because I was in prisoner's clothes by this time, he took a hold of me, and I says, hold on, I says, I'm the officer. I had a blanket round me, like. So he says, right, come with me, and we went up through the attic onto the roof.
And then it went quiet.
It took about 5 minutes. It seemed longer, but it just took about 5 minutes.
And it was all over, basically.
Jackie had survived his ordeal with just cuts and bruises, much to everyone's relief.
Well, I saw grown men weep, tears streaming down their face. And Jackie sat in a chair and he looked at me and we smiled at each other, relief on my part. And I says, Jackie, some people will do anything for overtime.
And you were in overtime for that time.
Oh, I was in
overtime.
overtime. I was paid overtime all the time I was there.
It was 106 hours overtime. It seems funny now we're talking about it. It wasn't funny at the time. We've often looked back and laugh. Though it was a terrible dread.
Having spent just a few hours on Scottish soil, the unit returned to Hereford where no fuss was made. But there was a note from someone who mattered.
All we received was a message from Maggie Thatcher saying, "Well done, boys." Her boys. She called us her boys. And that's it. You know, you get on with life and away you go.
As far as I'm concerned, they were muscular social workers. Muscular social workers. And I said to one of them, I said, "Look, I don't know who you guys are, but I hope I never see you in my jail again." And that was all. They said nothing, and I said nothing else.
The job was done, and hushed up to avoid controversy. But news of SAS exploits as urban warriors would soon spill very uncomfortably into the public arena when they engaged with a far more substantial adversary. On the 6th of March 1988, 3 IRA terrorists were shot dead by SAS soldiers in Gibraltar. The terrorists had been planning to detonate a huge car bomb outside the governor's residence during the changing of the guard ceremony. The SAS shot them down in the street, explaining that they opened fire because the terrorists had made movements which looked as if they might be reaching for concealed weapons, or be about to detonate the bomb by remote. But it emerged afterwards that the terrorists had in fact been unarmed, and had not yet planted their bomb. Then, eyewitnesses described how they had seen the SAS apparently shooting their suspects in cold blood. There was a huge public outcry. For the first time, the use of such lethal force by the SAS was stridently challenged. Had terrorists been summarily executed? Was there a policy of shoot to kill? The scandal highlighted the complex moral and legal questions surrounding the use of the SAS in the troubles of Northern Ireland.
It's not possible to expect SAS soldiers to be policemen. They're SAS soldiers, that's what they've been trained for. And where we have to ask the question is whether we should be using people like the SAS, who are a heavily armed, highly trained, very, very aggressive military unit, in policing operations.
Nowhere was the role of the SAS more difficult or ambiguous than in Northern Ireland. They began their long stay there in 1976. Following a horrifying spate of sectarian killings, Prime Minister Harold Wilson had come under intense pressure to do something. Out of the blue, he announced that the regiment would be deployed in South Armagh.
I think this announcement was actually aimed at the IRA. Basically, what Wilson was saying is, right, we've had enough, we're sending in the SAS and, we're going to start killing you.
Wilson wanted the SAS for its propaganda value, but its role had not been thought through. The regiment was still essentially a kind of imperial task force, which had just spent 6 years fighting a secret war in the Arabian Gulf. Neither their fighting prowess nor their unique skills in winning people's hearts and minds would necessarily be appropriate in Northern Ireland. And no one had actually consulted the SAS about their new mission.
As I understand it, nobody at the SAS knew that they were going until it appeared on the news in the evening that Harold Wilson had decided to send them in.
There's a possibility of a secondary explosion right here.
It was the beginning of a new and darker period for the regiment, many of whom felt uncomfortable operating on UK soil.
Northern Ireland should be a job for armed police who know the law, who know how to work the law, get around all the minefield that the law is out there, and they also know all the areas.
Snapper went to Northern Ireland straight from a no-holds-barred shooting war in the Gulf state of Oman, where he staunchly defended the town of Mirbat.
I mean, this was only 2 years after the Battle of Mirbat, and unlimited supplies of ammunition, whacking away with a 5.0 Browning, heavy combat. And then suddenly, I'm there on the streets of Belfast, having been brainwashed into this, don't pull your shooter in case the guy's unarmed, and only pull your shooter if you can identify a weapon. And on it goes, the rules and regulations. You can no longer give it kill or be killed on full throttle.
Just after he arrived in Ireland, Snapper was being driven through Belfast by an undercover policeman when two men tried to hijack their car. The kind of restraint required in the UK went against all his instincts as a battle-hardened SAS man.
So there I am, driving up the Falls Road, only been in the province two weeks, and we were doing a familiarisation exercise. Unbeknownst to me, the cop had left his door open, which is bad practice, bad practice. Next minute, this heavy guy, big bloke, came running around the back of the car, got the car door open. He obviously wanted the car for a bomb job. And it's, you know, get out the car or blow your effing head off. All this kind of stuff. And my heart was pounding about the closeness of it all, you know. I looked at this guy and I could see he had his hand inside the bomber jacket, but couldn't see a pistol. I already had my 9mm Browning underneath the copy of the News of the World with the safety catch off. I thought, double tap, it's all over for you, mate. And I was just waiting for him to show that pistol. That's all. Hesitation, because of the brainwashing drilled into you. Don't open fire until you see a weapon. So, didn't open fire, and he's there. Get out of the car, I'll blow your effing head off.
Soldiers in Northern Ireland are each given a yellow card. Its exact contents are secret, but it summarises the law governing when they may open fire.
In the yellow card, it does tell you in no uncertain terms that if you do open fire and kill somebody who's not armed, you could be in for a murder rap. When you're in UK, you've got to play the political game. Or we have to. The IRA don't. They couldn't care less what Whitehall say. They don't have a yellow card. Whenever they're going to do an operation, when they get their weapon out of the armory, wherever it is, they know they're going to open fire and they're going to kill people whether they are armed or not. Not us. It's total nonsense to me.
The attacker had threatened to shoot Snapper and the policeman, giving the impression that he had a gun in his pocket. As he staggered back, there was no gun in his hand.
You know, so if I'd have double tapped him, it would have been me in court the next day. So this is the kind of situation that you're confronted with in Northern Ireland. You know, you're not in control.
As it happened, he didn't open fire, and thank goodness for him. And you know, those kind of incidents have taken place throughout the British military involvement in Northern Ireland.
It is an area of deliberate ambiguity in which the man at the sharp end, particularly if it's an SAS soldier, he's frankly left to use his own judgment.
The role of the SAS was to be the cutting edge, to do the jobs which were too difficult or dangerous for the less highly trained regular army and police. The regiment was expert in gathering information behind enemy lines, and these skills were taken to a new level in Northern Ireland. Soldiers would frequently spend days or even weeks in observation posts, or OPs. Watching the terrorists was dangerous and grueling work, as one SAS soldier remembers. To protect his anonymity, his words are spoken by an actor.
The main job of the regiment was to gain information. They had the sort of inbuilt skills for OPs and different ways of getting information that the Green Army didn't. And the best way to get information is through eyeball.
Mounting an OP in Catholic South Armagh meant remaining unseen, dug into a ditch or amongst the hedgerows in what was known as bandit country.
The way their ASUs work, you know, their active service units, they're going to use an area and they'd get that area cleared. I mean, even little kids, they'd send little kids in to walk around the hedgerows, things like that. I mean, they weren't stupid. You get the old farmer and his dog and they're not doing checks on the cattle, they're checking, looking for signs of OPs. There's only certain places you can hide, you know, a ditch, a bush. you're in a cow field or something, and you know, cows, they are inquisitive and they'll come along and they'll stand there for hours because they know somebody's in there and there's nothing you can do.
Such covert operations were even more difficult right under the noses of suspected terrorists in built-up areas.
And when we got down there, we had to really review our tactics, we had to really review our procedures.
In urban terrorism, it's a special kind of soldiering which requires new techniques to blend in into the urban milieu.
The SAS would usually set up an observation post or OP at night, perhaps in a disused building, and they would have to stay put, sometimes for weeks.
You go in there and you've got human functions, you know, you're in there for timing. You've got to eat and you've got to go to the toilet, so I mean, you can't just sort of have a dump and leave it in the back of the room because you've got to be in there. The smell and then hygiene and all the rest of it, so it's plastic bag jobbers, you know. You've got a building that's supposed to be derelict. I mean, the slightest bit of noise as well. I mean, the moment you drop something, anything, you know, your camera or something, and you get this clunk coming from a derelict building, they know that somebody's in there. And there was one job, I won't say where, but the lads were in there and the local kids come along and, you know, they get a little fire going and the building went on fire. And the lads are upstairs and they've had to be pulled out. I think it was actually lit by the baddies just to flush them out or burn them alive.
The crucial difference between the SAS and the multitude of specialist intelligence agencies in Northern Ireland was that they were there to react aggressively to what they saw in front of them when necessary.
They'll be squatting in their bush, peering out, waiting for something to happen. When it does happen, you know, unlike surveillance teams, they're not just going to write it down. They're going to be springing out, sort of guns blazing.
But more often than not, they were in fact restrained from taking such action. Perhaps because it might blow an informer's cover, perhaps for legal reasons. The struggle against the IRA could never officially be called a war, but the SAS went to elaborate lengths to kill terrorists within the restrictions imposed by the yellow card. In May 1987, the SAS learned through intelligence that the IRA were planning to bomb the police station in the village of Lough Gall. The SAS planned an ambush and were lying in wait when, as predicted, two terrorists drove up to the station in a digger with a 200-pound bomb in its bucket. Then a further 6 IRA men armed with assault rifles arrived in a blue Toyota van. The SAS watched and waited, hidden in a nearby wood. The rules prevented them from opening fire unless the terrorists presented a clear threat to life. But the police station was normally empty. So to create the necessary target, it is said that the SAS had deliberately placed soldiers inside it. Then it all happened. 3 IRA terrorists then leapt out of the van and started shooting at the police station. Another jumped out of the digger and lit the bomb's fuse with a Zippo lighter. Now the SAS had the justification they needed to open fire. Moments later, all 8 IRA men were dead. But it was too late to do anything about the bomb. It exploded, flattening one end of the police station and injuring some of those inside. But another tragic result of this elaborate plot was that 2 innocent men who happened to be driving by had also been shot. One of them died. Nevertheless, the operation was regarded as a huge... The tragic result of this elaborate plot was that 2 innocent men who happened to be driving by had also been shot. One of them died. Nevertheless, the operation was regarded as a huge success by the SAS and by many who supported a tough line against the IRA.
The SAS often characterised as, if you like, mindless killers. But they do make arrests. And one of the, they will indeed claim to have killed, I think, something like 38 Republican terrorist guerrillas, and to have arrested many times more than that.
In fact, ambushes were relatively rare. The SAS frequently provided protection for the police as they made arrests. But such uncontroversial operations did not attract publicity.
There's quite a lot of time when you're actually on jobs and you've got a policeman with you. That's what people forget. A lot of the time you might be there as protection for them. And then when the need arises for the police to arrest people, you've actually captured them. They're arrested and you just filter away out of the way and, you know, you've gone.
Inevitably we're sort of skewed towards the sort of spectacular shoot-em-ups. We know more about the ambushes that were successful, you know, in which terrorists were killed, than we do about the arrests, you know, the arrest operations which stopped an IRA operation in its tracks, and in which, you know, no shots were fired.
The number of IRA killed by the SAS during the Troubles varied dramatically from one period to another. In the 5 years to November 1983, they killed no terrorists, but during the following 3.5 years, they killed 18. Did this reflect a hardening of policy, a will to make war on the IRA? One SAS soldier serving at the time describes how his troop actually set a trap for an IRA unit who were planning to murder a coal delivery man in County Tyrone.
The local ASU, active service unit, were actually spotted tailing this coal man. And they've selected this guy like an easy target in their eyes. He was either a part-time soldier or a part-time copper, you know, a nice bloke, married, and they were going to kill him. But we didn't know when, and we didn't know where. So we come up with this plan. Said, right, he's driving round about and he gets a puncture or something like that where he's got to stop. So it's like a lure, in a way, to try and get them onto the job. So we selected a spot, we covered it with an OP, reactive OP, which basically means we're there to watch. But if it turns bad, we can react to it.
The spot they chose was just outside the village of Drumnachilly. An SAS man took the place of the coalman to keep him out of danger.
And lo and behold, the bad boys turn up. I mean, they're in a vehicle, you can't touch them, you can't stop them. And they drive past 3 or 4 times, past the coal lorry where the guy was sort of fixing his puncture. They actually had the wheel off, and they didn't do anything. Next minute, they're driving up the road towards where we are, and they're about 200 yards away, and the old shots start coming. And there's quite a few rounds bouncing round about, you know. The guy who was firing was actually hanging out the back window of the car, like one of these old gangster movies. We just opened fire. There was about 8 of us there, I suppose. And they got the shot of the life, you know. So within seconds it was over and done with. And the 3 in the car got killed.
It was one small group of people trying to do for another small group of people, and with great ruthlessness. It was a very almost personal war with the IRA. The IRA, the impression I get, were then and still are terrified of the SAS.
But the question remains, was there ever a deliberate policy to murder terrorists? A so-called shoot-to-kill policy.
The problem with the phrase shoot to kill is, in military terms, it's meaningless, because if you shoot, you're trying to kill somebody. When it's used in connection with this alleged policy which existed in the late 70s, whereby the RUC and by implication other parts of the security forces were deliberately finding terrorists and killing them, again, it is simply not true.
There has never been an overt explicit shoot-to-kill policy. That is not the way Whitehall does these things. The British way tends to be oblique and indirect.
But quite apart from questions over whether it's appropriate to use the hard edge of the SAS in Northern Ireland, did doing so actually reduce terrorism?
My own personal opinion is that killing terrorists didn't do any great good. That the more of them we killed, the more disgruntled brothers, cousins, sons, nephews we had who were ripe for recruiting by the terrorists. It was much more effective to put them in prison, and that did have a deterrent effect on terrorism.
Over the last 2 decades, the SAS have emerged as anti-terrorist urban warriors, and the public has become aware of the ferocity and moral ambiguity of some of their actions, both at home and abroad. But curiously, their reputation has not been dented, but has grown, and as their glamour and celebrity has increased, so has the intensity of public interest. The SAS are now victims of their own success, their ability to function as an invisible, deniable unit, forever compromised.